All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into ancient Rome.
One of history's biggest heavy hitters, that's for sure.
You got that right. And we're going to cover all the myths, the conquests, the drama, all those juicy details you sent over.
From humble beginnings to a sprawling empire, we're giving you the fast-track version, no filler.
Exactly. So let's kick things off right at the heart of it, all those legendary beginnings. I mean, come on, Romulus and Remus, raised by a she-wolf. You can't make this stuff up.
Well, they kind of did.
Right. Myths and all that.
But here's the thing, even if they're not literal history, those stories tell us a lot about how the Romans saw themselves. Chosen by fate, destined for greatness. It's all there in their founding myths.
Powerful stuff. And they had that whole Aeneas angle too, right?
Exactly. A Trojan prince escaping the wreckage and finding his way to Italy, destined to found a glorious lineage. It all plays into this idea of Rome's exceptionalism.
So these myths were basically their PR campaign, shaping their image for the centuries to come. Pretty savvy, if you ask me.
Absolutely. But let's flip the coin for a second. What does actual archaeology say about Rome's early days?
Not quite as dramatic, I'm guessing.
You got it. We're talking small settlements popping up around 1000 BC. Think more along the lines of villages, not empires. Humble beginnings.
Okay, so a bit less founding myth and a bit more slowly figuring things out then.
More or less. It wasn't until around 800 BC that things started to take shape. They began draining the area that would become the Roman Forum, built the first temple to Jupiter, and little by little expanded their territory.
And all this eventually paved the way for Rome to ditch the whole kingdom thing and become a republic area. But honestly, every time I try to wrap my head around the Roman Republic, with its consuls and senate and assemblies, it just feels like a recipe for a bureaucratic headache. Can you break it down for us simple folk?
Well, it was complex for sure, but that was by design. The checks and balances, they wanted to avoid anyone getting too much power.
So kind of like a real-life game of civilization where you have to manage different factions and keep things from imploding.
You're catching on. Instead of a king, they had two consuls elected each year. They shared power and kept each other in check.
Clever.
Then you've got the Senate, a bunch of elder statesmen advising the consuls and controlling the purse strings. And don't forget the assemblies where regular citizens could vote on laws and elect officials.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could get messy, but also why it might just work.
And it did. Surprisingly well for quite a while. This whole power-sharing thing, though messy at times, was a big reason for Rome's success. It prevented tyranny and created space for debate and compromise.
So they figured out the whole democracy thing way back when.
Well, it was more nuanced than that, but they were definitely onto something.
Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
Not even close. These early Romans, they faced their fair share of challenges.
Like that whole thing with the Gauls, right?
Right.
Not exactly the friendliest bunch.
Understatement. In 390 BC, the Gauls basically said, "Hold my beer," and sacked Rome. It was a huge blow, left a real mark on the Roman psyche.
Can't imagine that did wonders for their self-esteem. But if there is one thing we know about the Romans, it's that they were nothing if not resilient.
You nailed it. They rebuilt, came back stronger, more determined. The Gauls might have taken their city, but they couldn't break their spirit.
That's the spirit.
There's even that famous quote from the general Camillus, "With iron, not gold, Rome buys her freedom."
Powerful words.
And those words foreshadowed what was to come. The Gauls were just one hurdle. A much bigger test awaited them.
The Punic Wars against Carthage. Buckle up is right, because the Punic Wars were the definition of epic. We're talking a full-blown clash of civilizations, a slugfest for the soul of the Western Mediterranean that dragged on for over a century.
And no one embodies the sheer intensity of those wars better than Hannibal. I mean, the guy marched elephants across the Alps. Was he off his rocker or a military mastermind? Oh, Hannibal Barca was playing chess, while the Romans were still figuring out checkers. In 218 BC, everyone and their mother expected Carthage to attack by sea, their bread and butter. But Hannibal? Nope. He decided to take the scenic route, over the Alps, with elephants.
Okay, I'm all for scenic routes, but that's next level. Talk
Yeah.
about a logistical nightmare. What was he thinking?
He was thinking, go big or go home, and it was genius, pure and simple. The Romans never saw it coming. They were completely unprepared for an attack from that direction. It allowed Hannibal to sidestep their defenses and take the fight right to their doorstep. The guy was audacious. And it's those bold moves that make legends, right? And his victories, they weren't just victories, they were utter beatdowns.
Right.
Trebia, Trasimene, and especially Cannae. Those battles left the Roman Republic teetering on the edge.
Especially Cannae. That one was practically biblical, right? Didn't he wipe the floor with an entire Roman army there?
Yeah, Cannae still gives military strategists chills. Hannibal outmaneuvered and decimated a Roman force twice the size of his own. It was a low point for Rome, no doubt. But it also revealed something remarkable about those Romans. Their grit.
They just wouldn't quit, would they?
Exactly. Most empires would fold it after a blow like Cannae, but not Rome. They were stubborn. They realized they couldn't out-Hannibal in open combat, so they switched gears. They played the long game, harassed his supply lines, picked their battles carefully, and slowly chipped away at his forces.
A war of attrition.
Exactly. And it all came down to the Battle of Zama in 22 BC. This time, a Roman general named Scipio Africanus, a brilliant strategist in his own right, he managed to outfox Hannibal, lure him into a trap, and hand him a decisive defeat.
So, in a way, they beat Hannibal at his own game. Poetic justice, some might say.
It was a turning point, for sure. Carthage was on the ropes after that, and Rome was the undisputed top dog in the Western Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But those victories, as glorious as they were, they came at a price. Decades of non-stop fighting left its mark.
Yeah, you don't just bounce back from that.
Mhm.
What were the long-term consequences of those wars?
Well, imagine Rome as a farmer who, to win the war, had to sell his plow, his livestock, even some of his land. Yeah, they won, but at what cost? The constant need for soldiers, it drained the lifeblood out of their small farms. Guys came home to nothing, forced to sell what little they had left to wealthy landowners who were more than happy to use slaves captured during the wars. It created this massive rift between the haves and the have-nots, leading to, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty.
So they conquered their enemies abroad, only to find themselves battling new demons at home.
And that's where our friend Julius Caesar struts onto the scene.
So last time we left off, Rome had kicked some serious Carthaginian tail. But back home, things weren't exactly peachy.
Not even close. They'd traded one battlefront for another.
And that's where old Julius Caesar makes his grand entrance, stage left. Talk about a guy who knew how to make an entrance. What was it about Caesar that made him such a pivotal figure in all this chaos?
Ambition, charisma, military genius for sure. He was like the ultimate Roman cocktail, saw the cracks in the Republic and went all in.
And let's not forget, he wasn't just a military man. The guy could write, charm a crowd, knew how to work the political game like a pro.
Oh, absolutely. He understood that power wasn't just about legions, but about winning hearts and minds. The man was a master of propaganda.
And he wasn't afraid to make a statement, like that whole crossing the Rubicon business. Basically a giant mic drop moment in Roman history, right?
Oh, like a you want to play rough, game on. Yeah. It was a power move, plain and simple, a calculated risk that cemented him as top dog, at least for a while.
But, as they say, all good things.
Yeah, about that. Let's just say Caesar learned the hard way that not everyone appreciates a good power grab.
Brutal. So what happens after the whole assassination thing? More chaos.
Think of it like this Caesar's assassination. That was the earthquake. What followed were the aftershocks. Another power vacuum. A fresh batch of civil wars. It was messy, even for Rome.
And through all that emerges Augustus, Caesar's adopted son. Talk about carrying on the family business.
Augustus was a shrewd one. Understood that Rome was itching for stability, for a break from the drama. So he consolidated power, sure, but he played it smart.
Instead of dictator, he was more like, hey, I'm just here to bring back the good old days.
Exactly. He was all about restoring order, bringing back the good times, and, it worked.
Enter the Pax Romana, golden age of peace and prosperity. Pretty impressive after all that turmoil. What was his secret sauce?
He was a master of reading the room, strengthened the army, stabilized the economy, and hammered home this message of unity across the empire. It was like a reset button for Roman society.
And it worked for like 2 centuries. That's a pretty good run for any empire. So, what happened? Empires don't just fade to black, do they?
Well, even the mightiest empires have a shelf life. By the 3rd century AD, trouble was brewing. Economic woes, political corruption, good old-fashioned overreach. Those problems don't just fix themselves.
Sounds familiar. And then you've got the barbarians at the gate. Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
It was like a perfect storm. You've got internal divisions, external threats, and then, to top it all off, a plague rips through the empire. It was a recipe for disaster.
So what did they do? Did they just roll over?
They tried to adapt, of course. Emperor Diocletian, he took a swing at reform, split the empire in 2, tried to share the load. But it was basically too little, too late.
And that brings us to the grand finale.
Wow.
The fall of the Western Roman Empire. 476 AD, Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor standing, gets the boot from a Germanic general. What a way to go out. Any parting thoughts on what ultimately did them in?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It was a slow burn, a combination of factors. But one thing's for sure, their fall was a reminder that even the mightiest empires are built on shaky ground.
A cautionary tale for the ages. But even in its absence, Rome's legacy lives on, right? It's like their influence is embedded in the DNA of Western civilization.
Absolutely. Their laws, their language, their engineering, their architecture, it's all around us.
Yeah.
They might be gone, but they're definitely not forgotten.
What a ride. From those legendary beginnings to the rise and fall of an empire, ancient Rome never disappoints. And as we look back on their triumphs and tragedies, it makes you wonder what mark our own civilization will leave on the world, doesn't it? That's something to think about as we wrap up this deep dive into ancient Rome. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.